Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a new edition of the Daily Debate. In tonight's show, we're going to be focusing on the Egyptian-African relations. Egypt has been undergoing many efforts and achievements, actually, in the African file since President Sisi assumed office. We're going to be focusing on boosting these relations, the political, economic, cultural and social Egyptian-African relations. But before we do that, let's take a look at some of the stories making the news today. And we'll start off with Egypt actually hosting 3-day talks between Libyan delegates that started on Tuesday in a bid to hammer out a political solution to the crisis in the neighboring country. On the sidelines of the talks, the delegates met with the head of the Egyptian National Committee, who conveyed President Sisi's greetings and keenness to achieve unity in Libya through a peaceful settlement without any foreign interference in the country's internal affairs. The head of the committee reiterated Egypt's full support to Libyan legitimate aspirations, adding that Cairo continues its efforts to achieve peace and stability. For their part, the Libyan delegates expressed appreciation to the Egyptian leadership for the efforts exerted to achieve peace and stability in their country, calling on Egypt to continue its pursuit to preserve the Libyan unity and integrity. During the meeting, the delegations, comprised of more than 75 members, discussed requests of the Libyan South in order to boost political settlement. Egypt has reaffirmed that it stands at equal distance from all parties, asserting that it will work to set several solutions and understandings for the crisis. And Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry reiterated on Tuesday Egypt's commitment to preserving and enhancing human rights. Presiding over a meeting of the High Committee for Human Rights, Shoukry said its mere creation is a practical interpretation of the state's strong political will and keenness to protect and respect human rights. The top diplomat stressed the significance of the file being at the core of the state's development strategy led by President Sisi. He asserted that the 2030 vision aims to safeguard the essential human rights for citizens and fulfill their needs and future ambitions. These were some of the stories making the news today, but now let's check out this report regarding Egypt boosting its ties and relations with its African nations and African states in the political, economic and cultural spectrum, and we'll be right back.
Egypt targets deepening bilateral strategic, political and economic relations with African countries within the framework of President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi's keenness to develop the Egyptian-African ties and the country's industrial exports to the African countries. The Ministry of International Cooperation is working on developing and supporting the economic cooperation ties between Egypt and the international and regional organizations. The country plays a pivotal role via supporting economic, financial and technical cooperation between the African and Arab states. Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry has expressed Egypt's commitment to pursue efforts of promoting joint cooperation with African countries in the coming period and supporting joint efforts to achieve the aspirations of all Africans. Shoukry has hailed relations between Egypt with African states as well as the achievements made during Egypt's presidency of the African Union. The top diplomat has pointed out that the President Sisi pays due attention to all the African causes. There are many achievements made by Egypt during its AU presidency, especially in promoting regional integration and economic and social development in the continent, as well as peace and security in Africa. President Sisi is keen to pay constant visits to the African states in order to enhance ties at economic and political levels. In the framework of Egypt's support to the Democratic Congo to chair the African Union in 2021, a Congolese delegation visited Egypt on Wednesday to explore ways of cooperation, particularly trading of diplomatic cadres and coordination over African affairs. The recent visit by President Sisi to Juba may not have produced an agreement between the two countries on military and security cooperation, but in assessment of Cairo, it succeeded in opening the door to significant advances in such cooperation. Meanwhile, Minister Shukri received last week the coordinator of the unit in charge of the Democratic Republic of Congo's upcoming chairmanship of the African Union for 2021. This comes within the framework of the Congolese side's preparations for its upcoming chairmanship of the African Union and its keenness to benefit from the successful Egyptian experience in this regard, in light of President Assisi's assumption of the AU's chairmanship in 2019.
مصيرنا واحد وأهدافنا المشتركة واحدة، وما يتحقق من خير وفائدة لمصر من شأنه أيضا أن يعود بالنفع والفائدة على كافة دول القارة. إن مصر لن تدخر جهدا لدعم ونقل خبراتها لأشقائها الأفارقة لتصبح أفريقيا قوة فاعلة على الساحة الدولية بحلول عام 2063. سوف تتجه إفريقيا إلى المزيد من التقدم والازدهار والسلام والتعاون المشترك. إن كافة تحركات الدول الإفريقية تهدف لتأمين مستقبل أجيالنا القادمة. تحيا شعوب ودول إفريقيا وتحيا مصر.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and now we're joined here in the studio by Dr. Amani عصفور, President of the African Business Council. Dr. عصفور, thank you very much for joining us.
It's always a pleasure to be in Daily Debate.
Dr. عصفور, now you are the President of the African Business Council. You have an in-depth knowledge of the Egyptian-African relations. The presidency and the government has been undergoing many efforts to strengthen the ties between Egypt and its African neighbors that has been, quite frankly, neglected for decades, actually. Now, since the president worked on this file, it was really manifested in Egypt becoming the president of the, presiding over the African Union in 2019. And there were so many efforts. Can you please just shed a light on how far we've come so far since really working on that file extensively?
Primarily, it is very important to highlight that the newly established Africa Business Council will play a big role in this, because it has just been established as our premier advocacy pillar for all the voice of the private sector within the continent. And on the 5th of December, there was, during the African Union Extraordinary Summit on the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, I was honored to give the vote of thanks and address the heads of states and governments, and talking about how our African ties could be strengthened through the economic relation, through increasing our intra-Africa trade. And increasing our intra-Africa trade, it's very important to highlight that the newly established Africa Business Council will play a big role, and to make sure that we have our African products, which of course we have a lot of products here in Egypt, and exporting it to our African brothers and sisters within the continent. How can we, as Africa Business Council, make sure that we increase our intra-Africa trade, and the products that is present within the African soil doesn't come from other countries like China, like India, like any other countries, which is having the advantage of exporting to the African continent. Also, because strengthening our African ties actually economically is crucial for the operationalization of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. It will be launched on the operationalized on the 1st of January. And hence that we need as Egypt to see what are the real opportunities within the investment on the African soil, and with also exporting our scientific expertise, exporting our industries, and also making sure with our centers of excellence to invest in our African continent and make sure that we have industries to add value to our African raw materials, because this is actually the main issue of achieving the Africa we want. Africa 2030 development agenda, a prosperous, peaceful, integrated Africa that is driven by the citizens of Africa. The private sector is the role. The private sector within the whole continent is the main pillar, is the main player with reference to integrating our African ties, with reference to empowering our women and youth on the ground, with reference to strengthening the capacity of our small and medium enterprises in order to support our African economies and growth. It is very important to understand that the mechanism of strengthening our ties is through creating prosperity and wealth for our African people.
Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're now also joined over the phone by Ambassador Mohammed Higazi, the former Assistant Foreign Minister. Ambassador Higazi, can you hear us, sir?
Yes, of course, Hisham. How are you?
I'm very well. Mr. Ambassador, now, what would you say are the main achievements Egypt has achieved in really strengthening the relations with Africa? What sort of achievements or files have been tackled by Egypt through strengthening their relations with Africa so far?
Thank you very much for the question, Hisham. And allow me at the outset just to extend my greetings to my dear and old friend, Dr. Amani Asur, and thank her for her relentless efforts to bring Egypt-Africa relations to where it belongs. Egypt has a strategic vision towards Africa. As we all know, during the presidency of Egypt to the African Union 2019, Egypt has played a very important and crucial role to bring about many successes in Africa, particularly the FTA that Dr. Amani has referred to as one of the principles and milestones towards One Africa, a dream that we all are hoping that the integration will bring us to economies that can stand alone without support from the external world, but partner with it as an essential tool to confront poverty, illegal immigration, and terrorism. So Africa is heading for an integrated approach to their economy, and in the center, Egypt can play a very important role with its active private sector. But allow me to be frank with you, Hisham, and I'm putting this idea to Dr. Amani for further discussion, which is the need to establish a fund to support private businesses in Africa. Egyptian private sector will not be able to work without a support or a loan, an easy loan to the government, providing that the Egyptian companies are the ones to do the business for the African countries. India has done the same, China, South Korea, Turkey even, and many other. They avail funds with soft interest rates, and that allow the companies of this particular countries to work freely in Africa in all domains without really availing funds or an Egyptian Exim Bank that can work hand in hand with the African government. Our private sector will hesitate to interfere and to work freely in Africa. A lot of demand to the infrastructure in Africa. Egypt is the champion of the infrastructure in the African Union, where the Commission for Infrastructure are an Egyptian. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi applied policies in the country, here in Egypt, understanding the need for better infrastructure, for better economy. Same should apply to Africa, and our companies are very well known. Without mentioning names, our companies are everywhere in Africa. As you may have followed the Stately George Dam in Tanzania, many roads and many infrastructure that have created good reputation to our companies. So what is lacking is that we avail funds for those companies to work in Africa on a soft loan basis, like what the Chinese have committed themselves to do. They are availing $15 billion to Chinese companies to work in Africa on a soft loan basis. Same happened with India, who availed $5 billion, Turkey $2.5 billion, South Korea $4 billion, and goes like this. Every country that wants its companies to work freely in Africa and to gain contracts finances those soft loans for the African countries, who are very much willing to accept Egyptian companies in their markets. And I think this is one of the most important withdrawals over the years, following the African economies growing with the support of different nations or international partners, but with the easy finance that is supported by their respective partner, being it India or China or others. So Egypt should maybe commit like $2 to $3 billion to Egyptian companies on a soft loan basis through a kind of an Exim Bank of Egypt towards supporting the African economies, and of course opening doors to Egyptian companies.
Your Excellency, now we'll definitely be talking to Dr. Asfour extensively about this, but what about if we're looking at it from the political side? What would you say are the remaining challenges or obstacles or files or issues or crises that Egypt needs to overcome with its African neighbors?
I think many hurdles have to be overcome, particularly the water issue, to ease the tension between the nation in East Africa and the Eastern Nile issue, or the Blue Nile issue, with the Renaissance Dam negotiation going on for almost now 10 years. I think easing tension on this file will open up gates for stability and prosperity in East Africa, leading Africa in general to a much more attention given to development. So I think the proposition of Egypt of allowing Ethiopia to develop its resources, but with respect with the Egypt only lifeline, which is the Nile Basin or the Nile River, will definitely allow much more stability. We hope that Ethiopia will regain back its feet to negotiate with open mind, that what we are all seeking for is a stable Africa to silence the guns. And without that, all the efforts that Mrs. Amani and fellow colleagues from the private sector will not really yearn fruits unless we create stability. Stability is the key, security is the key to confront terrorism, to confront illegal immigration, to allow our private community, private sector community to work freely from one country to another, and to show off their ability to produce in Africa for Africans, for better economies. And I think the Egyptian companies can do that hand in hand, but above all, you need law and order, you need security, you need to silence the guns.
Yes, hopefully so. Ambassador Mohammed Higazi, former Assistant Foreign Minister, thank you very much for joining us. Dr. Asfour, now you've spoken about how the economic cooperation is really the key and the cornerstone of establishing and strengthening relations between Egypt and its African neighbors. And you've emphasized on the private sector as well. So when does the public sector, the government, and the governmental sort of economic cooperation and the private sector starts to take the front seat in driving these relations stronger?
Let me first thank Ambassador Higazi for mentioning a very important pillar, which is access to finance and financing trade, because this is one of the really huge obstacles with reference to accessing the market. Now, with reference to the partnership with the government and the private sector, it is crucial for any implementation of any policy, because if we're talking now that the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement with its in Ghana now, and the Secretariat, they are all working on the policies. Now, who is going to implement it is the private sector. 95% of all our African private sector are small and medium enterprises, including women and youth. So it is crucial that we have a special, I call it the triad of empowerment, the three pillars. First, empowering private sector, the people, the policy, and the product. So the people themselves, the private sector, including women and youth, we need empowerment programs for them, having access to education, access to awareness of the intelligent for the markets, access to finance, as Ambassador Higazi have already mentioned, awareness about what is the market in Africa, because not everybody knows the market and not everybody has the finance to have a marketing budget. So this is about the people themselves. The policy, we need the African leaders to have policies that is favoring our African private sector. I personally, when I was chairing COMESA Business Council, I addressed the heads of states. I asked them to have a special preferential treatment and a percentage of the public procurement to the SMEs, including women and youth. And Kenya implemented this now. 30% of all government procurement goes to SMEs, women and youth, and people with disabilities in Kenya. The new chair for African Union, Cyril Ramaphosa, President of South Africa, already in his acceptance speech mentioned two very crucial issues: financial inclusion for women, and the start of the decade of the financial inclusion 2020-2030, and the other issue is really about public procurement, to have at least 30%, all the governments and heads of states of the 55 countries under African Union, to have at least 30% of government procurement goes to SMEs, women and youth. Now, what I am trying now, inshallah, to do it as the newly, as the founding president of the Africa Business Council, I'm honored to be the first president for this big organ, is to address already, and I addressed the heads of state on the 5th of December at the extraordinary summit. I said we need a certain percentage of the public procurement that goes to our African private sector, because all the tenders, all the purchases, many goes to the multinational companies. It also goes to external non-African countries, companies. We need to have a special percentage of all the public procurement goes to our African private sector. So this is one of the policy I will be advocating for with the heads of states, and making sure that the Africa Business Council will play its role in this advocacy. Now, the third pillar, because we talk about people, policy, and product. In order for me to increase our intra-African product, I need a value-added product. I need a strong, competitive, standard African product, packaged, you see, and this is the real issue of how I empower my African private sector, small and medium enterprises, women and youth, to have a value-added product. Recently, last week, I was in Malawi. We had a big trade fair, physical trade fair, with COMESA businesswomen associations, federations, and 21 countries have attended of all COMESA. The women had a lot of products, but not branded, not packaged. The mining, even the mining sector, they are still raw. The diamond, the gold, the gemstones, the semi-precious stones, they are all raw. I need the industrialization. I need them to cut the stones. I need them to have it as jewelry. So, and the agricultural products. We have a lot of macadamia, a lot of ground nuts, and still, for instance, in Egypt in Ramadan and in many of our Arab countries, we still are importing from Asia. Although, like for instance, macadamia nuts, Vietnam get it from Africa, roast it in Vietnam, and export it to the Arab world.
Dr. Asfour, when you say, when we talk about the private sector and the investments now, are we talking mainly about the Egyptian private investors investing in Africa, going to the African states and establishing their business there? Or is it the other way around, looking for the African investors coming to Egypt and maybe have some sort of an exchange of expertise and know-how?
When we are talking about private sector, it's about integration among our private sector. It's about, and even the African Business Council, it's about investment and trade, industrialization, innovation. How can we have joint ventures? How can we send our know-how and scientific expertise to invest in African countries? For instance, if we have a country that has already major natural resources, how can I put an industry there? I invest, and then I start exporting from this country to other countries within Africa. So it's both, it's vice versa. To invest in our African continent and to make joint ventures with our African brothers and sisters within the continent, and make sure that the scientific expertise that we have can be really transferred to our African continent. The major issue is that I need a mapping exercise for the existing natural resources on the continent and for the existing industrialized product on the continent. For instance, one of the things I always say, here in Egypt we have 165 pharmaceutical industries, yet till now many African countries are already importing it from China and India. How can I reverse this? To reverse this, I need to have partners, but I also need harmonization of the registration of the pharmaceutical drugs across the continent. And this will be really the main role of Africa Business Council and the operationalization of Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. Because if I want to register a pharmaceutical product, I cannot register everyone in 55 countries. I need harmonization. So this is how we can really work on it and make sure that once it is registered in one country, then at the high level criteria, then it could be registered in all the other countries, and make sure that what's existing on the African soil, we don't import it from other countries.
Yes.
That would go for the machineries, for the industries. Like, for instance, in Malawi, they need tractors, they need many of the agricultural industries that we already have it here, but they don't know about it. So the whole issue is about information. Information about what's existing on the continent and how can we do the matchmaking.
Yes.
It's about finance, it's about access to market, it's about intelligence, it's about business linkages, and that is why I believe that the newly established Africa Business Council, which is actually the organized private sector within the continent, and it's inclusive because it will, under umbrella, it will include all the regional economic blocks business council, the COMESA Business Council, the SADC, which is for the southern part, the ECOWAS, which is for the western, the North African, the central, all the 8 economic blocks, regional economic blocks will be included within the African private sector organized Africa Business Council, and will include the corporates, the sectorial organizations, the SMEs, the women entrepreneurs, the youth. So it is really an inclusive organ to help and operationalize the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, actually as well, the President has really emphasized the importance of solving one of the existential issues for Egypt and the African continent, and mainly Egypt, Sudan and Ethiopia, manifested in the file of the Ethiopian Renaissance Dam during his visit to South Sudan. Let's check out this report and we'll be right back.
The Egyptian affiliation to the African continent comes on top of the Egyptian foreign policy and constitutes one of the main milestones in the history of Egypt, where since President Sisi assumed office. Egypt has aimed to play an active role in various mechanisms of joint African actions through stimulating cooperation between Egypt and African brothers in all fields. The matter which was shown by paying many visits and welcoming the African officials in Egypt. However, such visits witnessed the signing of many bilateral agreements between Egypt and the African countries in order to support economic cooperation. Since President Sisi took office, Egypt showed keenness to establish balanced relations with all the African countries. Accordingly, President Sisi paid foreign visits and participated in the regional and international summits and forums, other than his bilateral visits to various Arab African countries, which comes for the interest of Egypt politically and economically. In the first visit by an Egyptian president to South Sudan, President Sisi and his South Sudanese counterpart Salva Kiir discussed regional security and the usage of the Nile waters. Sisi and Kiir discussed maximizing the usage of Nile waters, which President Sisi stressed that it should be a source of hope and national development. The president said he's asking the international community to lift sanctions on South Sudan, which is slowly recovering from 5 years of civil war that killed nearly 400,000 people. The implementation of a peace deal is behind schedule. For his part, South Sudan's president said that he stressed on the importance of a dialogue in dealing with the issue affecting regional security and the responsibility of the Africans to seek African solutions to the African problems. The Libyan crisis comes at the forefront of the Egyptian foreign policy priorities, where Egypt affirmed this fact through its initiative in which it stressed its firm stance towards the developments in Libya. The Egyptian initiatives are based on 3 principles, namely respecting unity and sovereignty of Libya and integrity of its territories, non-interference in Libya's internal affairs, and maintaining its political independence, as well as the commitment to the comprehensive dialogue and non-violence. Egypt hosted and held many meetings with various Libyan parties, especially the Libyan lawmakers, parliamentarians, as well as regional and international powers concerned with the crises in Libya. It also participated in the regional and international conferences on Libya. Egypt continues support to the brotherly Libyan people and works to restore stability and maintain unity of the Libyan territories in the face of interference, the matter which was reflected by the Cairo Declaration initiative that was launched on June 6 of 2020 from Egypt under the auspices of President Sisi for a ceasefire in Libya, where it was internationally welcomed.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and now we're joined over the phone by Ambassador Ali Al-Hifni, former Assistant Foreign Minister for African Affairs. Ambassador Hifni, can you hear me, sir?
Yes, of course I do.
Mr. Ambassador, for over a decade, almost a decade now, we've been talking about the Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, having trilateral meetings between the foreign ministers of Egypt, Sudan, and Ethiopia, the irrigation ministers of the 3 countries, with the presence of the World Bank and the U.S. administration. It's been going on talking about the filling and operating of the dam. So far, how far have we come in solving this issue, and when will we see the end of it peacefully and satisfactory for all 3 countries?
Let me first express my greetings to you, to your viewers, to Dr. Amani for the occasion of Christmas and the New Year. I hope that the next year will be much better and we will be much luckier compared to 2020. Now, let me tell you that Egypt has, from the very first day that the African Union, headed currently by President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa, since they have attempted to play a role in such a way that they could diffuse the tension between Ethiopia from one side and Egypt and Sudan, the recipient countries of the Nile water, we have supported the role played by the African Union. We have supported the efforts that were exerted by the South African president, the current president of the African Union. And we have seen it, the president took part in several meetings of the heads of states of the member countries of the Bureau of the African Summit through the video conference. And we, of course, understand that we are all faced with a real problem with COVID-19 in Africa, but in the whole world. And of course, the situation in Sudan, the recent events that we have witnessed in Ethiopia, they have played a role in making the negotiation process slower. But having said so, we have been fully invested in those attempts through the year 2020, and we have reiterated, and through also the contacts of the President, the Foreign Minister, our high officials, wherever they are, when they visit or they meet dignitaries in Egypt, in Cairo, when they receive them, or when, as we have seen it recently through the visit of President Fattah al-Sisi to France, to Southern Sudan, and always we stress the need to come to an agreeable setting of or settling of the problem that exists between Ethiopia from one side and Egypt and Sudan from the other side, stressing on the need to have a solution that is agreeable for three parties, a fair solution, but also a committing solution through a legal text that the three countries will abide by, not just today, but in the future. So we keep on following those attempts, those contacts. We have welcomed regaining the momentum that was lost for several reasons through the negotiations in such a way that we could settle the problem and put the problem behind our backs and look to whichever is more important, which is our efforts to integrate the three countries and the region of the Horn of Africa and Eastern Africa economically, socially, and so on. So we are faced with that dilemma for the time being, but we do not lose hope, and we are in constant contacts with the several parties, including the international observers, and of course the African Union, in such a way that we could come back to the negotiating table and discuss about the best way to resolve that problem between the three countries.
Yes, we are all hopeful for that. Mr. Ambassador Ali El-Hifni, former Assistant Foreign Minister for African Affairs, thank you very much for joining us. Dr. Asfour, now, in the world of politics, every country, each state, really is looking for whether they're going to gain. It's all about options, incentives, and what really dictates many political directions and activities are the economic benefits and the economic interests of all countries. Now, how far do you feel the Egyptian-African economic relations can influence, if not dictate, its relations with many of the African countries, especially that there are a lot of crises and turbulences and developments day by day within the African continent in different states?
Let me first greet Ambassador Hifni because he touched on a very, very important issues with reference to the political instability in some countries. Your question is very important because If we have a real mapping of the African continent, 55 countries, and to see the summit theme was about silencing the guns.
Yes.
Silencing the guns and making sure that there is a peace in Africa. What could bring peace? If I have economic stability, if I have prosperity, if I have creation of jobs, if there is no poverty, if there is no illiteracy, if there is access to the needs of our African people, if I manage my natural resources properly, this is the major issue of prosperity. If I have prosperity, why should, for instance, terrorist groups they cannot have the youth, our youth, or the children to be soldiers within the African continent? If those kids have access to education, if those youth have had opportunity for jobs, definitely nobody will be able to recruit them and go to be terrorists and carrying the guns for 50 euro or less, carrying the young children. If I have the family's prosperity. So this is why it is very important that the private sector plays its role and supported heavily by the public sector in order to achieve our African prosperity and silencing the gun. We need to economically empower our people, our youth. More than 65% of our African continent have youth less than 35 years. It's a young continent. The energy of the youth should be invested in industrialization, should be invested in the creation of jobs, but not on the other side to be invested in war or in civil wars or in political unrest. The private sector, to do its role, we need heavily supported by the public sector. We need a special legislations. If we are talking about the operationalization of African Continental Free Trade Area and removal of the customs among us, then the product will be able to go and to be less cost. If I have infrastructure, and I think this is very important because President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, during his presidency of African Union, he stressed on the whole issue of investment in infrastructure. We need to have roads. We need to have networks of trains in order to transfer our products. Some products coming from China or Asia will be less cheap than coming through our African continent. Our aviation industry is very important, but in order that we lessen the cost of the aviation, they need traffic among ourselves. Yes. They need traffic of goods, they need heavily traffic, but to do that, we need information, we need financial inclusion, we need access to better policies, and that is the role of the governments. Yes. In order that the government, they should give incentives. One of the industries that I have been talking to just this week in a big conference with reference to developing the small and medium enterprises and having export to the market, they mentioned that the cost of the energy is very high, so they have to really, indirect expenses, they have to put it on the end value of the product. It will be much expensive than other products coming from other countries. Yes. We need incentives from the government. If Egypt wants to have export to the African continent, we need the Egyptian government to give incentives to our industries to lessen the cost of the energy, to make sure that it is supporting its private sector in order to access the African market, and vice versa. When I address the head of states, and I will still address them again, asking them to have preferential treatment for the African private sector, because at many times they give, in African continent, they give incentives to multinational companies to come and open their plans, to open their industries, while the African private sector, they don't give them the same equal opportunities. So this is the kind of thing that we need. We need our banks to finance our trade. We need to make sure that within the Africa Business Council, my vision is to have sectors, for instance, whatever, sector for construction materials, sector for the garment and industry, sector for pharmaceutical industries, for medical consumables and supplies. Within the COVID area now, many medical consumers and supplies have been brought from China. Millions of dollars has been going to China, while on the African continent we have the capacity to have those medical consumers and supplies. In Egypt there are 480 industries for medical consumers and supplies. Where are those industries from the African market? 165 pharmaceutical industries. Where are those from the African market? I have been really surprised to know that there is special, very, very important here that within the Union of Egyptian Industries, a huge industry, engineering industries that nobody knows about it. So when in my African brothers and sisters, when they want to set up industries, they go to China to bring them, while in Egypt we have it. So the information is very important. The information, and that's what I am trying to do now, inshallah, within the Africa Business Council. I will make a data, and we also have rightly also the digital platform, which is Sukuku Africa. Sukuku Africa is a digital platform that is launched also by the President of Niger, who is championing the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, and His Majesty the King of Eswatini, in order to make sure that all our products are put on the digital platform. Sukuku, they call it Sukuku like souk. Sukuku in Swahili means market, central market. So this is also another channel, digital transformation, to put all the products on this. And I am trying to see how we empower our small and medium enterprises, our small industries who have no marketing budget, to register on this Sukuku and be visible to Africa and the world, because my intention as Africa Business Council, newly established as the first president, how can I have intra-Africa trade among ourselves, add value to the product, make industrialization, make value addition, branding, designing, packaging. Right today, I had a meeting with a packaging company here in Egypt. I was telling them, how can my women in Malawi, they have a lot of macadamia, but they don't know how to package it. So this is how we really do it, that I bring a company from here with packaging to them. Also with reference to any packaging that they need within the continent. So this is the matchmaking program that we're trying to do to empower our African private sector, including women and youth, because the major economy within the African continent is still informal till now. Definitely. How can I really boost this intra-Africa trade through empowering our people on the ground?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, as Dr. Asfour has mentioned, it's a lot of work that needs to be done from the private sector, really, and the SMEs as well, with the help of the government and the public sector, trying to stand in front of all the international competition that are looking for Africa for resources and as a fertile soil and a fertile market for them to sell their products. Definitely, there's still a lot of work to be done for the African continent to be self-sufficient. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this edition of the Daily Debate. But before we go, I'd like to thank my very distinguished guest, Dr. Amani Asfour, the first and current president of the African Business Council. Dr. Asfour, it was a pleasure having you here.
Thank you. It was my real pleasure being here.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned for more coming up on Nile International. I'm Hani Saif. Thank you for joining us.